In my experimental film, I was looking at how different light affects light leaks onto the sensor. As light leaks are often used as an artistic device, I wanted to find out how this can be controlled to obtain the desired look. In the camera, the lens serves to focus the light onto the sensor to capture the image. Using this information, I would be looking at how this can be manipulated by varying the light, colour, and size of the gap between the lens and the sensor. For this experiment, I was inspired by a range of sources. When looking at photography, many photographs feature light leaks, many of which have been done intentionally. This is most prominent with 35mm photography and other analog film photography formats. This is primarily because of the various ways light can leak into the camera and reach the film. An example of this is this photo by Sebastianel for their Essences series. The leak has been created intentionally because the warm tones of the light complement the rest of the photograph. I also see this appear in my own work. This is a 35mm film photo I took, and as you can see, light has spilled across the frame due to it leaking into the camera. Finally, light leaks are widely used as a transition method in videography. It has recently become mainstream through its use in travel and adventure films. It gives a smooth and quote cinematic transition from one shot to another, but some argue it has now been overused in this style. For the experiment, I used different styles of light to see how that affected the captured light. I started by using LED light on its own to capture images like this. I used a Helios 44-2 lens for this. This lens has 6 elements. I noticed that the number of glass elements a lens has affects how the light leak behaves. You can see here that the large patch of light is the light source hitting the sensor directly, and these additional artifacts are coming from the light bouncing through the 6 elements of the lens. For this sequence, I placed different coloured gels in front of the light to see how it lit the sensor. With this, I noticed something quite interesting. The light which hits the sensor directly, like this example, is not affected by the colour of the light, it simply goes to white light. This is the same for the light that is bounced through the elements of the lens. The colour is only visible on the left side of the frame here. I believe this is because one of 2 reasons: either where the light is bouncing off the silver rim of the lens connector, or the gel is diffusing the light enough to provide a soft light to hit the side of the sensor. Even more interestingly, I used a green gel over the light of this sequence. On the left is the direct green light, but on the right, the area which does not get direct light is magenta. This is interesting because these are opposites on the colour wheel. After researching, I believe this is due to some of the light diffracting through the aperture and lens elements and spilling onto the right side of the frame next to the direct light. Next, I used an incandescent light. I noticed the behaviour of the bulb was different from that on LED. The light was a lot softer and didn't create hard shadows like the LED. Furthermore, I noticed that when I placed gels and lights very close to the sensor, certain things were in focus. For example, here the gel is pretty much all sharp, and here we can see a fingerprint, and after searching I found this was directly on the sensor itself. This tells me that with no lens, the focal point can be manipulated by the gap between the lens and the sensor. What didn't go well is also the same as what I would do differently next time. In the future, I would not use an actual lens to do this. Although they give an interesting look due to the elements, this hard shadow here is caused by the lens connector. I would instead use a tube or block of some sort which only has smooth surfaces. If I were to repeat this experiment again, I would also use different shapes of objects to lens whack and see what effect this has on the leaks. I believe from this experiment I have learnt about how the sensor captures light and how the gap between the sensor and the lens can be used to my creative and visual advantage. I have also learnt the importance of blocking light from hitting the lens directly by using a matte box other than when I actively don't want to use one for my creative style. Furthermore, it is important to remember the difference between a light leak and a lens flare. A light leak is most commonly formed when, as discussed, there is a gap in between the sensor and the lens in video. and a lens flare is formed when the light source is in front of the lens, reflecting off the elements within the lens.